The night my brother told me I was not welcome did not start with shouting, it started with silence. It's a kind of silence that feels louder than words, the kind that tells you something has already been decided. Without you, I remember sitting on my bed holding my phone, staring at his message again and again, as if the words might change if I read them slowly, or if I waited long and knew you are not coming. It is better this way. Please understand. 3 short lines. No anger, no explanation, no carre. Did not reply right away, not because I did not know what to say, but because I suddenly realized something much deeper. I was no longer part of the conversation. I was no longer part of the family. Let me take you back to how this all began. Me name is Adam. I am the younger brother, the quiet one, the one who fixes things behind the scenes, while others take the credit. Me, brother Mark. He was always the leader, the loud voice, the one everyone listened to at family dinners. He was older by 4 years, and from a young age it felt like the family revolved around him. Or parents did not mean it, at least I think. They did not, but Mark was the successful one, the confident one, the one with plans and dreams that sounded impressive. Was different. I liked structured details, numbers. I worked in logistics and planning, making sure things ran smoothly, making sure mistakes never happened. Mark and I were close on the surface, but there was always distance underneath. He led, I followed, and that pattern never changed. When Mark got married, the whole family celebrated like it was a national holiday. His wife Claire was polite, smiling, always kind in public. Bet something about her eyes never felt warm. She looked at people like pieces on a board, moving them when needed, removing them when nobody noticed it early, but I stayed quiet. That was my role. Fast forward to the present. Mark had planned a big international trip, a family vacation, something he had been talking about for months. Asked for my help, of course. He did. Adam, you are good with this stuff. Can you handle the bookings, the schedules, the connections? He said yes. I always said yes. For weeks I worked late nights coordinating flights, hotels, transport, making sure everything lined up perfectly. It was not a small trip. It involved multiple cities, tight connections, non-refundable bookings. He handled all of it through my work account, my professional contacts, my systems. Everything depended on me, and no one questioned it because they trusted me, or at least trusted my usefulness. And came the call. It was a simple call. Mark sounded distracted, almost uncomfortable. Damn. Listen, about the trip, things have changed. You'd already felt it in my chest, that tightening, that warning your body gives before your mind catches up. Changed. How there was a pause. It's just long enough to hurt. It might be better if you sit this one out. He laughed at first, a small, nervous laugh. What? Do you mean sit this one out? I helped plan the whole thing. Anatha. Pasa Claire thinks it would be awkward with everything lately. Everything. Lately, those words meant nothing and everything at the same time. It exactly is awkward. Did not answer direct. Liat. It's just family time, you understand. That was when I realized. Family time no longer included. May did not argue. I did not raise my voice. Said okay, because that is what I always did. Bet when the call ended, something inside me broke quietly, not in a dramatic way, not with tears, but with clarity. Opened my laptop and looked at the trip details. Every flight, every hotel, every connectional under my control. And for the first time I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask. Before, am I always the one who gives and never the one who is protected? Marries started flooding back to time. Mark took credit for a project idea. I gave him the time. Forgot my birthday, but expected me at his events. The way Claire slowly pushed me out of conversations, out of decisions, out of relevance. This was not sudden. This was a pattern. Non-patterns can be changed. That night I did not sleep, not because I was angry, but because I was thinking clearly, calmly. Logical or revenge is often imagined as loud, explosive, emotional, but real change, real consequences come from quiet to science. He was not planning to hurt anyone. I was not planning chaos. Was simply going to stop protecting people who stopped respecting me, and that was when the plan began. Not with rage, not with threats, but with a simple truth of everything they were counting on was built on my silence, and silence can be broken. This was only the beginning. The strange thing about being pushed out is that it forces you to remember everything you tried to ignore that night after the call. I kept replaying moments from my life, like scenes from an old film, moments I had brushed aside, moments that suddenly made sense. I want you to understand something about me. I was never the angry one. I was never the loud one. I believed that staying calm meant staying safe. Mark learned early that raising his voice got him attention. I learned that staying quiet kept. The peace when we were kids, Mark decided what game we played, what movie we watched, who sat where if. I disagreed, he would roll his eyes or laugh, and everyone would say, "Oh, that is just Mark being Mark." So I stopped disagreeing. Gore. Parents worked hard. They were tired most days, and Mark was easy, he demanded. And they gave A was easy too. But in a different way, I needed less. So I received Lasat. Least that is how it felt. In school, Mark was popular, teachers liked him, friends followed him, he was good. With numbers, quiet, reliable when Mark needed help with homework. He came to me when he needed notes. He came to maybe when friends asked. Who helped him? My name was never mentioned. Eddie. Told myself it did not matter, that family is not about credit. That belief followed me into adulthood. When Mark started his first business, guess who helped with planning, with budgeting, with systems? Point. He needed someone to fix a mistake late at night. He called Mabu. When the business succeeded, when people praised him, he stood alone in the spotlight. He stood behind the curtain, telling myself I preferred it. That way then came Claire. Mark met her at a networking event. He told me about her like she was a prize, smart, ambitious, connected from the first dinner. I noticed how she listened. She did not listen to understand, she listened to measures. Watched who spoke, who mattered, who could be useful. I talked, she smiled politely, then turned back to Mark. Over time she started making small change. Family dinners were rescheduled, plans were made without asking me, decisions were announced, not discussed. Mark never questioned it. Maybe he did, but chose comfort over conflict. First real warning came 2 years ago. We're planning a holiday dinner. I suggested a simple change to timing, something that would help everyone. Claire laughed, not kindly autumn. Always overthinks, we do not need to complicate things. Mark laughed. Too samothing. Inside me tightened, but I smiled. That became the pattern, my input. Labeled as unnecessary, my presence tolerated but not valued. Still I stayed back. Walking away felt like failure because family was supposed to mean patience. Then came the trip when Mark asked me to handle it. I hesitated just for a moment, not because I did not want to help, but because something felt off. This trip was expensive, complex, and important. If something went wrong, it would be a disaster. You sure you want me to handle everything? I asked Kadaf. Of course, Mark said, you are the best at Thysos. Words stayed with me. You are the best at this. Not you, matter not. We appreciate you, Jess. Usefully worked harder than a very triple-checked every detail. Every booking, every connection, spoke with agents, negotiated upgrades, handled insurance, made sure they would travel comfortably, smoothly, without stress. And while I worked, the group chat grew quieter, messes between Mark and Claire. Plans discussed privately, noticed, but said nothing. Beckos. I had learned that noticing does not change anything. Unless you are willing to act. Day before the call, I sent the final itinerary of everything. Confirmed everything. Locke and Mark replied with a simple thanks. No excitement, no warmth that night. I felt uneasy, like I had finished building something, and someone was already planning to take my name off. Ithin came the call, the exclusion, the polite rejection, and suddenly every memory. This was not about awkwardness. This was about control. Claire did not want someone on the trip who knew how everything worked, who could fix problems, who could not be managed easily. And Marky chose the path of least resistance. Easing. That hurt, but it also cleared my mind. Bess. Once you stop hoping someone will change, you can finally see them clearly. Was not angry, not yet. He was disappointed. Deeply disappointed that my loyalty had become invisible, that my effort had become expected, that my presence had become optional. That night I opened my work system again, it to sabotage, not to destroy, but to review, to understand exactly what depended on me and what would happen if I simply stepped back. He saw the fragile connections, the non-refundable bookings, the tight timeline. This trip was a house of cards, beautiful, impressive, balanced on a single unseen hand. Manooned for the first time in my life, I did not feel smelly, felt aware. Awareness changes everything. It changes how you breathe, how you think, how you choose. Closed the laptop and sat in the dark, asking myself a question that scared me. What happens if I stop saving? Themi did not answer it that night, but the question stayed with me, growing heavier, stronger, and by morning I knew this was no longer about a trip. This was about respect, boundaries, and the cost of being taken for granted. Story was moving forward whether they realized it or not. The morning after that call felt strangely calm. No anger, no rush, just a quiet heaviness sitting in my chest. Woke up before my alarm, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many times I had been here before. Not this exact moment, but this feeling of being useful but unwanted. Made coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop again to act not yet he needed to understand something. First, I needed to see the full picture clearly. Without emotion, people think betrayal happens in one moment, one sentence, one decision, but real betrayal is slow. It builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day you realize you have been standing alone for a long time. I opened the itinerary, emails, the confirmation. 7 or 8 was under my name, my credentials, my professional access. The flights were booked through a corporate account. I managed the hotels. Were tied to negotiated rates. Only I could adjust. The local transport was coordinated through a partner who answered only to Mythos. Was not arrogance, it was responsibility. And responsibility had quietly turned into leverage. Leaned back in my chair, and for the first time, I imagined the trip without me behind it. Not ruin, not destroy it unsupported. On that was when something shifted. For years I believed that if I stopped helping, everything would fall apart, and it would be my fault. But looking at the system, I saw the truth. It would not be my fault. It would simply be the result of their choice. Choices have consequences, even polite ones. Me phone buzzed. A message from the family group chat. Claire had sent a packing reminder, smiling emojis, excitement. Reading it felt surreal. We're moving forward, celebrating, while quietly removing me from the picture. And not a single person asked, "Are you okay?" or even acknowledged what had happened. It was the moment, the exact moment, I stopped trying to be invisibly. Did not reply. Instead, I did something smelly. Archived the chat. It sounds insignificant, but it mattered. It was the first boundary I had ever drawn. Throughout the day, messages came in. Mark asking if I had forwarded one last document, a cousin asking about seating arrangements, an aunt asking about airport pick-you-Paul, polite, all assuming he answered calmly. Brief lies sent, handled, but something was different. Was no longer doing this out of loyalty. I was observing. Evening. Mark called again. Cone was lighter, almost friendly. He had just checking in. Everything good? If everything is said, I'd say good. Good. He hesitated. About yesterday, I hope you understand. Waited, letting the silence stretch. Understand. Why that this trip is just simpler without complication. Sure. It was not awkward, not timming complications. Smiled not because it was funny, but because it was clear. Am not a complication. I am a mirror, and mirrors make people uncomfortably, told him. I understood because in a way, I finally did. After the call, I did not feel hurt. I felt resolved. Went for a walk, letting the night air clear my head. Revenge is often imagined as fire, but real power is ice cam controlled. Precising was not planning to embarrass anyone I was not seeking. Kyosi simply decided I would no longer correct mistakes that were not minute that night. I made a list, not a plan, a list. What I would do and what I would not. Doi would not cancel anything. I would not lie. I would not interfere. But I would also not step in, not fix, not smooth over reef. Something required my approval, my confirmation, my active involvement. It would weigh. This was not sabotage. This was absence. Absence reveals everything. The next morning, small cracks appeared. A message from a hotel asking for final guest verification. Normally, I would respond immediate at this time. I noted it and did nothing. A transport partner asked about arrival changes. I acknowledged and said I would confirm later. Never came within hours. Mark called Agini. Did you get an email from the hotel? A scan you handled, Thaddy? Pause just long. Nuffy, am no longer part of the trip, remember? Or another silence. He said I forgot. Forgoth word landed heavier than anger ever cuffed her. That call, something inside me settled thee. We're already feeling it. Not panic, not disact or confusion. Con is the first stage when people realize they relied on someone more than they admitted. Be the end of the day, messages, increased questions piled up, answered when necessary, but never stepped ahead. Never. Fixed preemptively. Was watching a machine try to run without the unseen gear, and slowly, very slowly it started to struggle. That night, I did not feel guilty. Felt honest with myself for the first time in years. Had not changed anything, I had simply stopped compensating. In that quiet shift, I understood something important. People do not notice your value until you stop giving it away. This was still only the beginning, but the direction was set. The third day after I stepped back felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just heavier. Kind of heavy that comes before something gives way. Woke up to 6 missed calls, all from Mark spread across the night. He did not panic, I did not rush. He showered, made coffee, sat down on. Only then did I listen to the voicemail. Shis voice had changed, the confidence was gone, replaced by forced calm. Hey, Adam, call me when you can. Just need to clarify something. The next message came an hour later. Adam, this is kind of urgent, please call Meth. Last one was quieter. Might need your helpy. Let the phone rest on the table. It's not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Help is something you ask for, not something you assume be. Mid-morning, the group chat came back to life. Questions everywhere, screenshots, confusions. Samin could not access a booking. Someone else noticed a name missing, a connection time looked wrong. Things I would have fixed without a thought were now exposed, and for the first time, people were realizing how much they depended on someone they barely acknowledged. Finally replied in the group chat, "Em no longer involved with the trip planning. Please coordinate directly with the provider." No emotion, no explanation, just truth. Reaction was immediate. What happened is this. A joke. Mark called again. He answered this time. What is going on? He asked, trying to sound annoyed instead of worried. Edney. Thing I said, you told me I was not part of the trip. That does not mean you drop everything. He snapped that sentence. Right there was the liner drop. Everything, as if my effort was a switch, as if my presence was optional, but my labor was guaranteed. Stayed. Comark. You made a decision, I respected it. To our punishing us, he said. No, I corrected. I am stepping back. There is a difference. It went quiet, then came the pressure. A Claire thinks you are doing this on purpose. Sadie smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was expected. Wayne, what on purpose? Making things difficulty. Let the silence sit. Mark, everything is booked, nothing is canceled, nothing has changed. You were just seeing it without me smoothing it out. This was when his tone shifted. Can you just help this once for the family, Same family that decided I was awkward, the same family that excluded me quietly. Took a breath. Family does not only exist when things go wrong. I Sadie did not argue because there was nothing to argue with. After the call I felt something strange. Relief, not relief that things were falling apart, but relief that I was no longer pretending. Be afternoon, the situation is Scalatita. Hotel refused to hold rooms without confirmation. A transport company requested revised schedules. A flight connection raised a warning about tight timing. These were not disasters. They were normal issues I used to manage. They piled up. Claire messaged me directly. Adayam. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Out of Hondi replied. Wit. Do you need? Her response came quickly. You know how much work you put into this? Why are you doing this now? Doing? Fissy chose my words carefully. Am not doing anything. I am simply not doing what I was told I should not be. Part after was a long pause. The new or being petty. That word hit harder than anger. Petty. After years of loyalty, after weeks of unpaid work, after quiet support. This was how it was for Medi. Typed slowly, setting boundaries is not petty news. Did not reply. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was tired. Why is everyone so stressed? She Askidi told her the truth. Without blame, without dramatheer, with silence on the line. Did not know, she said softly, and that sentence hurt more than anything else, because it meant I had been invisible. Even to Irby. Evening panic started creeping in. In it, public panic, but private. Messages whispered, people asking me quietly if I could just check one thing, just confirm something. I answered politely, but consistently, am not involved each time. He said it. It felt easier, not because I enjoyed refusing, but because I was finally respecting. My Zulfmark called again late that night. That's time his voice was different, not demanding, not defensive. Itrude did not realize how much you handled. He admitted that was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard. Did not celebrate it. I did not. Soften realization after damage does not erase, the Damage replied. Calmly, you never had to realize, you just had to respect. He did not respond right away when he spoke. It was quiet can. We talked tomorrow, we agreed, not because I owed him, but because I wanted closure. After the call, I sat alone thinking about how fragile dynamics really awry, how people build comfort on someone else staying silent, staying reliable, staying smolid. How quickly that comfort turns into panic when the silence Enzi was not enjoying this, not truly, but I was learning that being needed is not the same as being valued, and that sometimes the only way people understand your worth is when they feel its absent. Chethy pressure was building, and something was going to break. He just did not know yet what it would be. The next morning arrived to quietly, like the calm before a storm that everyone pretends not to say. Woke up knowing something would shift, not because I planned it, but because pressure always forces truth out. Mark called exactly at 9 on time. Like this was a meeting, not a family conversation, answered without greeting. Need to talk? He said. Am listening there. Was a pause, the sound of him breathing, thinking, choosing words. This trip, he began. It is falling apart. He closed my eyes, not in satisfaction, but in recognition. It is not falling apart, I said. It is just no longer being held together. The thought sentence hung between you. Sighed. Claire is stressed. Everyone is stressed, said. He let him finish. Did not expect this. He had to expect with it. You would step away, complete a lither? It was the assumption. He kept my voice steady. Mark. You told me I was not welcome? What did you expect me to, Joanna? Third pauzu. Did not think it would matter this much. That was the moment, not the exclusion, not the Bloma thought sentence. Sue did not think it would matter. It mattered because it revealed everything. It took a breath at. Is the problem, I said. You never thought it mattered. Did not arguine. It did something unexpected, apologized. Not fully, not perfectly, but honestly did not mean to push you out, he said. Claire felt uncomfortable, and I chose the easy path. Easy path. Words felt heavy as he. For who I skied did not answer because he knew I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply spoke the truth. You have spent years making your life easier, I said, fixing problems before you even saw them. In the moment I was inconvenient, I was Rima Vetselinson. Quieted Missione. Did not realize how much I relied on youth. That sentence, that simple sentence, I did not erase the hurt, but it acknowledged it could feel the balance shifting it. Because I was winning, but because the truth was finally being spoken. Do you want Marcus? Sked's question surprised May. Had not thought about wanting, only about. Stappenji answered slowly. Want respect not when things go wrong, but before I want to be asked, not assigned. And I want you to understand that my help is a choice, not an obligation. Exalted. Claire will not like this, he. Sadie smiled to myself. This was never about her liking. Thought is not my responsibility, I replied. Another. Pausa. Khan, you help us now, he asked, careful line. Can you fix it, not you? Oh, us, Khan, you help. He thought about Etha. Could say no and let everything collapse up, but this was never about revenge, not the kind people imagine Nethys was about. Boundary, see, answered Anna sly. Can help, but things will change. Howie will help as a consultant, not as family labor. Everything will be clear, documented, and respected. Agreed without hesitation. Now he understood the cost of not agreeing. Ended the call quiet. Line of warmth, no celebration, just clarity within. An hour. Claire messaged Maher. Tone was different, measured, careful. Mark said. You are willing to assist again? Assistees, I replied, under certain conditions. Asked what they wear. Sent a simple list. Clear communication, no last minute changes. Without confirmation and acknowledgement that my role as optional. Thor was a long delay before she responded. An alien word, but it said more than a paragraph. He reopened my system, not rushing, not panicking. Call me. Addressed the most critical issues first, one by one. Mail sent calls. Deathing stabilized. Quicklinit magically, but predictably. Evening. The panic had fed a maces in the group. Chat shifted. Tanae, thank you. We appreciate this. Sorry for the confusion. Words. I had waited years to hurt, but something was different. Now we did not feel relief. I felt distanspicus. Once you see how easily you were replaced and how quickly you were needed back, you cannot unsee it. Mark called again. That night things are calmer. He said. Good. He hesitate about the trip. Are you sure you do not want to come either? It was the affirmate. Out of love, but out of fear of imbalancy. Thought for a moment. No. Sad. Why? Because this is not about the trip, I replied. It's about what happens after. Did not push for the first time. He respected a boundary without testing it. After the call, I sat quietly thinking about how power shifts, not when you shout, but when. Yuchuse had not destroyed anything. I had not exposed secrets. I had not embarrassed anyone. I had simply stopped being invisible in doing so. I had changed the balance forever. Trip would go on with adjustments, with lessons, but something else had already happened. Edley saw me on. Once people see you, they can never pretend. You were not there. This was not the end, but it was the turning point. The days after that conversation moved faster, but they felt strangely distant. He was involved again. Emails, calls, confirmations, but something had changed inside. Before, I helped because it felt natural, because saying no felt wrong. No. Every action was a choice, and the difference mattered more than anyone. Realized he kept my role professional, limited, clear. He did not join group chats unless necessary. I did not offer suggestions unless asked. I did not anticipate problems. He responded. I did not rescue it first. People noticed. Mark checked in more often, not to assign, but to ask. Claire stayed formal, polite, careful. Tension was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer about control. It was about uncertainty. It did not know where the line was anymore, and that made them cautious. For the first time, that caution worked in my favor. One evening, my cousin called. May did not know you did all this, she said, almost laugh. Most people do not, I replied. That call stayed with Manat because of praise, but because it confirms something. Visibility changes narrative. Aces. The departure date approached. Small issues kept appearing. Nothing dramatic, just friction, delayed confirmation, a pricing question, a timing conflict. Teach time I handled. Only what I had agreed. Tonathan more, nothing lessened. Each time I felt stronger, not powerful over them, but grounded in myself. Night before their departure, Mark called Agani. Just wanted to say thank you, he said. And I mean it this time. I believed. Himbot belief does not erase memory. You are welcome, I replied. Then he asked something unexpected after the trip. Can we talk about everything? Verithant word carried weighty. Agreed, not because I wanted resolution, but because I wanted honesty. Morning they left, I watched the flight status online. Everything was on time. Smoothie closed the browser and felt something surprising. Bitterness, no triumph, just peace. While they were traveling, messages slowly. Essential communication. He used the time to think, to rest, to remember who I was outside of being usefully realized. How much of my identity had been tied to fixing things, to being needed, and how exhausting that had been. Halfway through their trip, something went wrong. A connection was delayed, causing a ripple. Mark messaged me. Careful. Might need advice. Advisant. Actioni gave it clearly. Briefly. Handled the restand. They survived. That moment mattered at base. It proved something to them, and to Methi could function without me, just not as comfortably, and that was okay. One. The trip ended. They returned with stories, photos, memories, but also with a different energy. Less confident, more reflective arc. Called 2 days later, you free. He asked dues, met at a small cafe. Neutral ground. Looked tired, not from travel, but from thinking. Sat in silence at first. He spoke. He did not realize how often I put you second. He said. He listened. Interrupting, not correcting. G let him continue. It was easy, he admitted, to let Claire decide to let things slide, because you never complained. That sentence, that right there, and never complaining, not a quite does not mean okay. I said. Looked at me. Really look at he. I'm sorry. Said this time there was no excuse. After no explanation, no justifications. Sorry felt something loosen inside me. For the first time, his words were not about fixing a problem. They were about acknowledging. A persona talked for hours. Not arguing, not defending, just laying things out. Past moments missed. Signals, assumptions. Was not perfect, but it was real. When we stood to leave, he said something that stayed with me. Do not want to lose you, but I know I almost did. He looked at him. You did not almost lose me, I said. You lost the version of me who would disappear to make things easy. Nodded, accepting it. Walked away. Separate tell. No dramatic ending, no hug, just understanding. Gus. I went home. I realized something important. Trovinge is often imagined as someone else losing, but real justice is when you stop losing yourself. Here had not changed everything, but I had changed what mattered. That change was permanent. There It was still one more chapter ahead, one more moment that would test everything, but for now I was no longer invisible. I thought the hardest part was over, that once words were spoken, things would settle into something stably was. Wrong, real change is tested, not announced. A few weeks passed after the trip. Life looked normal from the outside. Family messages, birthdays, casual calls, but underneath everything was still adjusting. People were learning how to treat me, and I was learning how to protect myself. Tess came quietly. Mark invited everyone to dinner, a small gathering, nothing for mail. Texted me directly, Wold. You like to come or not? Are you coming? Not we expect, yeah, Wold. You like it, notice the difference. Immediately as I replayed when I arrived, the atmosphere felt careful, like everyone was watching, listening. Claire greeted me. Politely, no warmth, no coldness, neutral. Sat we talked Dan for a while. It felt normal. Than. Mark brought up a future plan. Another trip months away, an idea. He said he's turned to me without anyone realizing they had done. Ith old pattern waiting for me to solve. I noticed, and I wait. Mark. Kadatu will figure that out later, he said quickly. Small moment, but it mattered. Later that night, Claire pulled me aside. I want to clear the air, she said. At least Anetti did not think excluding you would matter, she admitted. I thought you would. Understand an Urstant word, Agani meta, ice understanding does not mean accepting. Isadi looked uncomfortably. I'm not used to people pushing back, she said. Honestly, I appreciated that, even if it came Letithis. It's new for me too, I replied. Conversation did not end in friendship, but it ended in troth, and sometimes truth is enough. As weeks went on, small moments kept appearing. Gitions paused until I was asked, plans explained instead of assuming. Not perfect, but better than, came the real. Test an emergency, nothing dramatic but stressful. A family member had an issue with travel documents, panicked. Late night, Calciverian looked to my old instincts. Flaherty could fix this quickly, easily. Took a breath and asked a simple question. What do you need from Minette? What should I do? Not I will handle it. What do you need? Thier was confusion. Then Claritadvis? Not Octione. Gave Ithi handled the restand. Something shifted. Again, respect grows when people see you choose, not when you rescue thought. Night I realized that biggest change was not in them. It was in May. No longer equated love with usefulness or belonging with sacrifice. Was present, but not deplete. Helpful, but not invisible. For the first time that felt like real families. There was still tension, still history, but there was also balancing. Balance is rare. Went to bed that night feeling something unfamiliar, secure. It because everything was perfect, but because I knew no matter what happened next, I would not disappear. Again, that knowledge, that quiet strength, was the real turning point. Distance has a strange way of teaching lessons, not the dramatic kind, but the slow, quiet kind that settles in when no one is watching. After that dinner, after the small tests, after the careful changes, I started noticing something deeper. It was not just that they treated me differently, it was that I felt different for the first time in my life. I was not waiting, not for approval, not for instructions, not for permission to exist. Weeks passed, and I did not rush to fill silence anymore. When the family group chat went quiet, I did not jump in to revive it when plans were made. I listened before offering anything in. Something unexpected happened. Edpool started filling the space themselves. Mark handled things he used to hand off. Claire asked questions instead of making statements. Others stepped forward, not perfectly, not smoothly, but they treed watching. That taught me something important. Me. Constant presence had not helped them grow. It had allowed them to lean in, leaning to long turns. Into dependence. They had mistaken dependence for closeness. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant I had played a role. Toei had trained them to expect me to rely on me, to overlook me, not intentionally but consistently. As I saw that, I stopped blaming them. Entirely responsibility is shared, even in imbalancion. Afternoon, I was alone at home, sorting through old files on my laptop. Those documents, messages of quiet effort projects I helped with, plans I supported, ideas I gave a why. Noticed a paternity was always behind the camera, never in front, always editing, never starring. Dan. I told myself that was humility, but humility without recognition turns into erasure. I closed the folder and leaned back. For the first time, I felt grief, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady grief for the version of me who thought love was earned through effort, too. Believed staying useful meant staying safe. That version of me had worked so hard and no one had protected him. not even himself. A message from Mark. Interrupted my thoughts, asked if I wanted to join him for a walk. Jasusi hesitated, then agreed. I met at a park near his. Placino agenda, no problem to solve. You walked in silence at first. He spoke, he keep realizing things, he's sad like Watho. Often I assumed you would just be there, he admitted. Nodded, it was easy. He continued to lean on you and forget you had limits. He appreciated the honesty. Talked slowly, not digging, not accusing, just reflecting. Tusing told me he felt exposed during the trip when things did not go smooth, like he had been pretending he was in control without realizing who was actually holding things together. Feeling it. Phone, I said, is uncomfortable, not a dead, but necessary. Sat on a bench watching people pass, families, friends, strangers. He realized something. Thini was not angry anymore, at Mark, not at Claringer. Needs closeness, and I had stepped back enough to see. Clearly clarity cools anger. Mark asked me something unexpected. Oh, you trust meth? Question caught me off guard. Trust is not a switch, I said. It grows with consistency. Accepted that fair. That was enough for now. As time passed, life continued without dramatic turns. And that was the biggest change in thing. It was exploding, nothing was breaking, and yet everything was different. Claire started involving me earlier. Not because she wanted help, but because she wanted input. Sometimes I gave it, sometimes I did not, and each time my choice was respected. That was new. One evening my mother called, her voice softer than usually. Have been thinking, she said, about what you told me, Listanetti. Did not realize how often you were overlooked, she continued, and I am sorry. Thought apology, simple, unpolishedment, more than she knew. He did not need her to relive the past. I just needed acknowledgement. Talked for a long time about patterns, about how families sometimes mistake silence for strength. She admitted she leaned on Mark to lead, and on me to supper without realizing the coast. Thought conversation closed a door I did not even know was open. After that I felt lighter, not because everything was healed, but because the truth had surfaced. And truth, even late as freeing months went by, family dynamics settled into something new, less efficient but more balanced. And I settled into my selfie, started saying no without explanations, without guilty, pursued interests outside of fixing, outside of supporting things that belonged only to me. On slowly, my identity shifted. He was no longer the one behind the scenes. I was simply present. Tone night, lying in bed, I thought about revengeth word, the idea, and I realized something. Sir Perzingi never wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to see on once they did. The need for revenge. Fade Becca's revenge feeds on invisibility, and I was no longer invisible. Greatest change was internally. No longer measured my worth by how needed I was. He measured it by how respected I felt, and respect once established changes every interaction. This distance, this pause, this quiet resetted. Done what anger never could. It had given me perspective, and perspective is power. There was still one final moment ahead. One last confirmation, not from them but from myself, and when it came, I would know if the story was no longer about exclusion or trips or family dynamics. It was about becoming visible to myself, and that changed everything. There is a moment in every long story where nothing dramatic happens. No shouting, no confrontation, no sudden twist, but inside everything changes. That moment came to me quietly on an ordinary day. I was sitting at my desk working on something unrelated to family, unrelated to fixing anything, and my phone rang. It was Mark. I almost let it go to voicemail, not out of anger, but out of habit. Then I answered. Hey, he said. Hey. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just open. I wanted to ask you something. He continued. I waited. There's a new project through a friend. They need help with planning and coordination. I stayed silent. I used to fill silence quickly. Now I let it breathe. I thought of you, he said, but I want to be clear. Clear, the word mattered. This is not a favor. This would be paid your terms, your timeline. I leaned back in my chair. Months ago, that offer would have filled me with pride and pressure. Now it just felt neutral. Thank you. I said, send me the details and I will let you know. He did not push, did not assume. We ended the call calmly. I sat there afterward thinking about how different that felt. Not being needed, but being invited. Not being assumed, but being asked. That difference was everything. Later that day I received the details. It was a complex project, the kind I was good at. The old me would have already started solving it. Instead, I closed the file and asked myself a question. Do I want this? Not do they need me? Not will this help them? Do I want this? I realized how rarely I had asked myself that. Wanting felt selfish once, now it felt necessary. I took a walk, letting the question sit as I walked memories. Surfaced nights spent fixing problems that were never mine, holidays interrupted by calls, decisions made around me, not with me, and then newer memories being asked, being thanked, being respected. Both were real, but only one felt healthy that evening. I called Mark back. I will take it, I said, but under one condition. Name it. If at any point the work is treated like obligation or my boundaries are questioned, I walk away. No hard feelings. He agreed. Immediately, no hesitation. And that told me something important. The change was not temporary. This was not fear. This was learning over the next weeks. We worked together carefully, professionally, and something interesting happened. Mark listened not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Claire stayed out of it, respecting the boundary, and I felt something new, pride, not in being useful, but in being clear. One evening, after a long call, Mark said something that stayed with me. "I am glad you did not disappear," he said. I paused. I did not disappear. I corrected. I just stopped shrinking. There was a long silence. Then, yeah, he said that after. That I noticed changes everywhere, not just with him, but with everyone. People mirrored the way I treated myself when I spoke with confidence. They listened when I paused. They waited when I said no. They adjusted. It was unsettling at first, realizing how much power I had given away simply by trying to be easy. One afternoon, my mother visited. We sat together quietly. She looked at me for a long moment. "You seem different," she said. "How?" Calmer, she replied. Stronger, I smiled. I told her the truth. "Stop trying to earn my place," she nodded slowly. "We all thought you were fine because you never complained." I met her eyes. Sometimes silence is survival, not peace. She took my hand. I wish I had seen that sooner. So did I, but regret loses its grip when understanding arrives. That night alone again, I reflected on everything. The exclusion, the pressure, the shift, the conversations. None of it would have mattered if I had not changed internally. They could apologize, they could adjust, but the real transformation was me choosing myself without fear of losing them, because that was the deepest fear all along. If I stop giving, will I still belong? Now I knew the answer. Belonging that requires self-erasure is not belonging, it is transaction. And I was done paying that price. The next test came soon after a family event, stressful, last minute. Old expectations surfaced, voices rose, tension built. All eyes turned to me out of habit, and I felt it, that familiar pull. Fix it, smooth it, save it. I took a breath and said calmly, "I can help, but not right now." There was surprise, then adjustment. Someone else stepped up, and the world did not end that moment. That simple moment confirmed everything. I did not need to disappear to be respected. I just needed to stop abandoning myself. As I lay in bed that night, I realized something powerful. The revenge people imagine is loud, visible, destructive, but the most effective revenge is becoming unreachable to the version of yourself that accepted less. I had not ruined anyone. I had not exposed secrets. I had not taken anything from them. I had taken myself back, and that was irreversible. There was only one chapter left, one final reflection, not about them, but about the lesson. And when I reached it, I knew this story had finally come full circle. There is a strange quiet that comes after long emotional storms. Not emptiness, not relief, just stillness. That is where I found myself after everything settled. No more urgent calls, no more hidden expectations, no more silent pressure. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became honest, and honesty changes how you stand in a room, how you speak, how you listen. Had passed since the trip, since the exclusion, since the shift hand, yet the impact was still unfolding. An evening, I was alone at home. No plans, no noise, just me and my thoughts. You realize something importante. Story everyone remembers is not about what happened to you. It is about what you allowed and what you stopped allowing. For years I believed being needed was the same as being valued. I believed loyalty meant endurance, that love meant patience without limits. No one taught me otherwise, and I never questioned. A tunnel silence forced me to listening. Thought back to the night it all started. The message, the calm rejection, the feeling of being erased. At the time it felt like Laszlo. It felt like a door closing, so another could finally open an easy door, not a dramatic one, but a necessary one. Had spent most of my life trying to prove my worth quietly, consistently, invisibly, and when I stopped, the world did not collapse. Relationships did not vanish. Family did not disappear. What vanished was the version of me that believed I had to earn space. That version worked hard, loved deeply, and deserved protection, but no one protected him until I did. That is the part people rarely talk about. Wait for others to see us, to defend us, to choose USB. Sometimes the moment that changes everything is when you do it first. There was no final confrontation, no grand apologies. As steady change marks still had flaws, Claire still had control tendencies, family dynamics were still imperfect, but they were no longer my burden bearers. I no longer took responsibility for fixing what I did not break. One afternoon, I met a friend for coffee. Someone who had known me for years looked at me and said, "You seem different." Lighterys, m'lady, stopped carrying what was never mine. I replied, nodded like he understood more than words could explain. That is when I realized that this lesson was not just about family or betrayal or trips. It was about boundaries, about identity, about self. Respect. It was about learning that kindness without limits turns into self-neglect, and that helping without choice turns into quiet resentment. He had felt that resentment growing for years, and I blamed myself for it, but resentment is not a flaw. It is a signal that something is wrong, that a boundary has been crossed again and again. Listening to that signal saved meth. Final confirmation came unexpectedly. Family gathering months, latter nothing dramatic, just conversation. Some joked, "Remember when Adam used to handle everything the room?" Laughed. Old me would have smiled, shrugged. This time I said calmly, "Still, can I just choose when?" The laughter softened, turned thoughtful, and in that moment, I felt no need to explain further. Back, I was not seeking approval anymore. That is the quiet power of growth. You stop convincing, you stop defending, you stop shrinking. You just exist as you arraigned. People adjust not because you demand it, but because you no longer accept less. He went home that night and sat in the dark thinking about revenge, and not the dramatic kind, not the kind that ruins lives, but the kind that rewrites patterns, kind where you become so whole that the version of you who is taken for granted no longer exists. That is the revenge no one sees coming. No one sees coming. Note finishment. Freedom is from the need to be chosen. Freedom from the fear of exclusion. Freedom from the belief that love must be earned. Did not change everything overnight. I changed one thing myself, and that changed everything else naturally. There is one lesson I carry forward, one truth I hold on to. It is this: never make yourself smaller to stay connected. The right connections do not require you to disappear, and if walking away from who you are is the price of belonging, at was never belonging to begin with. That its understanding came at a cost, but it gave me something priceless: peace. Not the loud kind, not the perfect kind, steady kind that stays in. That is where this story ends.